Let's get started with the material. The first section is going to have us go through and take a look at an overview of DataStage in general. In this section, we're trying to get to the basic terminology, to the moving parts, give you some idea of how these things fit together so that as we go along, we understand what it is that we're describing when I mentioned various terms and phrases. And then we start looking at the workflow. Looking at the time, we'll probably take a stretch somewhere in the middle here of this lecture, but we do want to start off getting some of the basics out of the way. And so first and foremost, as basic as you can get, what is it that DataStage does? It provides your ETL, extraction, transformation, and load. And don't let it confuse you. Transformation is the concept of working on the data while it's inside of our DataStage job. We happen to have a stage called the transformer, but don't let that fool you into thinking that you have to use the transformer for it to be an ETL job. Copying a column from point A to point B and simply renaming it does qualify as a transformation. So, unfortunate naming collision, but transformation in this case simply means doing something to the data while in our control. We have a transformer stage as one option of how we might provide that. We use DataStage for project integrations, for data integration. You see a lot of shops these days, a lot of sites these days that have more than one data repository. Back when I first started doing this stuff, most people had one database vendor that you went with, and that held all your data. And I'm sure many of you have seen the same thing. These days, we have multiple data stores. We have the transactional data, and then we have our persistent data. So you very well might have DB2 and then a Netezza system. Or you might have Oracle and a Teradata system, or you might have SQL Server and a Hadoop system, whatever the case might be. But the idea is that we have online transactional processing, and then we have more analytical assessment, profiling, and data mining, and those are different systems traditionally. So because of that, we need something that can quickly and efficiently move data from point A to point B. One of the big usages we see for DataStage is in migration to a data warehouse or a data mart. Of course, on another note, we have system migration, moving data from one system to another. You see a lot of that as well. You have two different parts within the enterprise. One team's using SQL Server, another team's using Oracle, and we have to integrate their data. We have to be able to manage the metadata. So we need a tool that's going to allow us to integrate and share information about our data architecture, about our database structures. We need something that can be my one-stop shop, in other words, for pulling in table structures, building jobs from those structures, testing, monitoring, and managing those jobs going forward. And when it's all said and done, creating reusable jobs like a batch job or a sequence job. And DataStage offers us all of that. It's an end-to-end ETL tool that provides us all of the different facets they've mentioned here. And we're going to get to see all of them. So they talk here about an information server. And the information server is a concept at a high level of the backbone of your ETL system. So when we talk about the InfoSphere information server, what we're talking about is a shared set of services, security, logging, access control. We're looking at things like common metadata, so that if one of us creates a table definition, the rest of us can share it. And then a means for executing our DataStage or our ETL jobs. We have a tool, the web console, which allows me to interact with the two pieces they mentioned here. The web-based server, the application-based server, the WebSphere application server, and access to the common metadata repository. The third piece, the DataStage engine, we have a separate series of client tools that we use for that. And I'm going to take you this morning through all of the client tools that we need to manage a project, a job, an environment. The backbone itself is what you see here. We're looking at a metadata server. So that would be your WebSphere server. The thing they're calling metadata server here would be your WebSphere server backbone. At the very bottom, they have two boxes there. One's repository, one is the web console. The repository is a database, and we'll talk more about that in the architecture lecture. But the repository database is where we store any and all shared metadata, such that if John were to import the sales table definition and he needed that for his job, if a week from now I need that same table definition, there's no need for me to go through that same set of steps to import it. I can borrow the table definition that John created and then use that in my job. That shared repository makes it able for us to share data throughout various projects and designs. And that's, of course, one of the first things we're going to learn how to take advantage of. On top of this architecture sit a series of products, and they list them out here. Each of these products are separate licenses. So to be fair, I want to make sure we're clear from the get-go. These are all separate licensed products that are part of what we refer to as the InfoSphere suite. They all run on the exact same backbone. And of course, if we look second from the far right, we see DataStage, QualityStage. We're here to focus on DataStage. They put QualityStage with DataStage in case you're not familiar. QualityStage is an extension to DataStage. It takes the DataStage engine and its capabilities and expand them into data cleaning, data synchronization, the ability to homogenize our data. So we can talk a little bit about how QualityStage fits into the big picture, but the reason you'll always see it lumped with DataStage is because you couldn't use QualityStage as a standalone tool. It runs on the DataStage framework. We see the other tools on that list, and some of them you may end up using, some of them you may not. Of the list up there, I would say that DataStage is by far the most commonly used. It's the most popular. If you ask me the second most popular, it would be Information Analyzer. Information Analyzer, the IA tool, so that's this guy here. Information Analyzer is a tool designed for profiling your data. And what you would do with that is you'd run the information analysis of your database, take the resulting report that creates, and turn it over to the SME. So the data that produces, we would hand off to the subject matter expert to go through so that they can then decide, okay, which fields do I need? How can I build my reports? It helps tell a subject matter expert what's available in our data source so that they can then work with it. So that's why it's a fairly popular tool inside of the InfoSphere suite. It's a way to provide profiling of your data, and it looks for things like patterns also. It'll come back and tell you, these fields are holding PII information. These fields are holding what look like credit card numbers or national identification numbers. So it's a good way for us to flag certain fields. A lot of times what you'll see is that the information that the information analyzer produces is handed off to us to then be employed when we use DataStage to help make sure that certain fields are dealt with certain ways. So a lot of times Information Analyzer may be run ahead of our ETL design so that we ensure the jobs we're building have the appropriate functionality. The other tools they mention are more niche. You know what? I apologize. I shouldn't say that. The Information Governance Catalog is a relatively new tool, and that is very quickly gaining in popularity. I wouldn't be surprised if a year from now I'm saying it's DataStage and then close behind it is the IGC, the Information Governance Catalog. Because as I'm sure many of you can attest to, when you're trying to provide the role of a data architect, it's not always easy these days to try to describe, document, control our entire data architecture from a single point of access in a meaningful way. And the Governance Catalog is a tool that seeks to address that. What the Governance Catalog does is it gives us various types of metadata in 3 different formats. It says you have the metadata that I've simply recorded. It actually plugs in to that shared repository down here and says, I can give you technical metadata. So going back to my earlier scenario, when John imported that table definition, for use in an ETL job, the governance catalog would document that. The governance catalog would then have a record that there was a table created for use in an ETL job. So, let me use that to try to give you some understanding of IGC, because it's a very interesting tool. Some of you might have heard in the past of something called the data dictionary. We used to have a business glossary, a data dictionary, the Infosphere business glossary. That's gone away. The business glossary is replaced by the governance catalog. So the governance catalog still has those same glossary-like functionality where we can create common terminology and assign a steward to a term, but it does a whole lot more now. They've really expanded upon it nicely. So, and this is a concept that's going to apply very heavily to what we're doing today in our work. Here's my database server. And in my database server, we have the sales database, inside of which is the sales table. So let's say this database is called the SLS database, and let's call the table orders. So in ETL, John wants to build a job to take data from the orders table and write it to a CSV file. To design that job, and I know I'm blocking it here, I'll get out of your way in a moment. To design the ETL job, he's going to add to his canvas a stage to connect to the database. Maybe it's an ODBC stage he chooses to use. It'll look roughly like this. And he's going to be pulling data from that ODBC stage and simply sending it through maybe a transformer for cleanup, and then on to a CSV sequential file. So that's the design he wants to build. To do that, we need to know what that table looks like. Out on your server, and this is something we're going to look at in a lot of detail this morning, out on your, let's call it our ETL server, we know that we have that shared set of services. So we have an instance of WebSphere. We have a DataStage engine, and we'll talk all about this design and different options you can use. And then we have a common metadata repository. So what happens here is when John's getting ready to build that ETL job, he wants to grab this table definition. Think of it like the DDL language for the table. And he's going to import that into here. So now what we have is the definition of the sales table. Then, when John builds his job, he says, okay, this database is based off of the sales table. So the term we use is load, and you'll see that a lot in DataStage. We load that table definition to here so that the system now knows what the table looks like, what the columns look like. It knows some information about, depending on what we save in there, how to connect. So that's our basic ETL design, and that's something we're going to work on today. We're going to actually do this today. We're going to bring in metadata into a shared repository so we can build jobs off of it. What does this have to do with the current slide? Well, the governance catalog, the IGC, the Information Governance Catalog, is a tool that helps us as data architects manage and track what we're using. So what the governance catalog is going to do is it plugs in It's primarily a web-based tool. There's a couple of different GUIs, but it's primarily web-based. And it plugs in to that shared metadata repository. That's our metadata repo for short. So the governance catalog will plug into that. And what is the governance catalog going to tell me? It's going to tell me that there's a job. Let's say we call this job sales load. So the name of this job is sales load. What the governance catalog will tell me, without me doing anything else, without us doing any other hands-on work, the governance catalog will show me technical data. So I'll put a T next to that for technical data. The technical data it shows me is that the sales load job, it'll actually show you a pictogram of the sales load job. It'll actually say, you've got a sales load job that looks like this. Database to the transformer to your target. And it will tell me that this table is based on the sales table. So the governance catalog, just by our design, gives me a way to go in and view information about how the data is being used without us taking any additional steps. That's already there. What we can add to that is that the system will also create operational data. And so the operational data, the ops, would be information like it was run on 4/25/2017, elapsed time, etc. So we can actually record operational metadata about the execution of this job to tell me how it ran, when it ran, who ran it, did it fail, did it succeed? And that too can be automatically recorded. The part where you really start getting into the big value add is that we can also add what we call our business metadata, which means I can come in here now as a governance catalog admin or manager or steward, and I can start documenting, sales table contains, and then I might document what it does. I might manually put in a few relationships that wouldn't be captured just by job execution. I might write up that the sales table does correlate to the payment table, even though we don't have a job connecting them. They do have a correlation. Sales should match records in the payments table. So that business metadata is anything we add to make it a better scenario, better and more easily traced scenario. So that's the concept of the governance catalog, to give us this layer that plugs in to the shared metadata and then builds off of that so that we can truly govern all of the work we're doing through that InfoSphere component. It is, as I said, it's a separate license. There are a couple of classes if you're interested in IGC, and you very well may not be, but I just wanted to make sure to give you a fair shake on it, what exactly the IGC does for us. It's a great tool. I've become very, very fond of it, and if you have it at your disposal, I highly recommend taking advantage of it. The part that we're going to focus on in here, so throughout our course, what we're doing is we're going to be looking at 3/4 of this. We're going to be looking at how to take that resource, how to import. By the way, I'll redraw a few of these diagrams a bit neater. I know I'm getting a little bit carried away here, but I'll show you how to import the metadata into your repository, how to then use that metadata and load it into your ETL job design, and then how to execute that job using that information in order to generate our result. We'll also look at some interesting side effects of all this, such as our ability to do what's called traceability analysis or impact analysis. I know I'm in the way here. I'll move in a moment. We can do impact analysis now on things like the sales table. Because of, even if you're not using the governance catalog, because of the fact that Infosphere maintains this information, that the sales table was used in the sales load job, that means that if I find out there's going to be a change to the sales table, so if somebody is going to delta the sales table, they're going to change it, we can run a report, even without IGC, just using DataStage. I can run a report to say, show me all the jobs that were built using that sales table's metadata. So I'm going to teach you how to do that. I'll teach you how to do impact analysis, how to look for relationships, to make sure that we're able to prepare for those changes, to understand what the impact would be, and where needed, make any alterations. So I know I'm getting ahead of myself, but I just thought if you could have that high-level concept in your mind's eye as we go through and dissect all of this, it might help you put certain things into context. And hopefully gives you some better understanding of what the governance catalog actually does for us. So the big three on this list, maybe four depending on how you read it: data stage, quality stage, information analyzer, governance catalog. The others, Fast Track is a tool that was designed to provide models of your ETL jobs. So it takes an ETL job, this picture, and it tries to translate it into something a little bit more SQL-centric. My take on it was always that Fast Track has been designed to try to turn ETL work into something a DBA could interpret. And that's a good goal. It also means that a DBA could say, I've got two tables, the DDL for each. Here's how I want to map them, and I'll write a few SQL statements to explain how that transition should happen. So Fast Track is able to take maps designed by a DBA and auto-generate an ETL job, or conversely, take an ETL job and show me a DBA-centric view of what it's doing. The downside to that, of course, is like any other auto-gen. When you automatically generate a job from SQL, it's not as efficient as if we wrote it by hand. If you or I designed the job, it would be much more efficient than letting the tool auto-generate. Where Fast Track used to shine, in my opinion, was for documentation. I ran into a few shops over the years who had a policy that said any ETL job must have a Fast Track model along with a description of what it's intended to do. But we've just seen a tool that replaced that concept. The IGC could be used to do that now. So Fast Track is still floating around out there. My personal interpretation is that I don't know that I see as much of a role for it going forward as it used to hold. I think that though they're not exact matches, I think that a lot of the value add Fast Track used to offer now can be found in the governance catalog. So that's why I say it's niche. There are some shops that love it, but they're few and far between, whereas governance catalog is finding a very wide, varied audience. The last two, DataClick is a way to track assets inside of DataStage and Infosphere in general, and the Services Director. The Services Director is a funny one because that's a tool that if you need it, it's fantastic. You just have to hit a very specific checklist for it to be necessary. The Services Director is all based around service-oriented architecture, around SOA. So if you come to me and you said, listen, Jason, we want to build a scenario where within our ETL, we have a total of 3 jobs that are using services. I would say you can do that with just plain old DataStage. Built into DataStage, there is a web service stage. So you could actually build a web service call into your ETL job, or vice versa, have the ETL job produce data that gets shipped out in an in a SOAP message, just using plain old DataStage. So as I said, you've got hundreds of jobs, 3 of them are using services. I would tell you to manage it in plain old DataStage. But if you came to me and said, we are primarily a cloud-based data resource, most of our access points come from service-oriented architecture, be they web services, be they REST-based service calls. So 90% of the calls that come in are service calls. Then the services director makes more sense. Because now you're telling me that it's not enough to just have the ETL jobs. I've got to have some mechanism for managing the calls in and out of those jobs, for added security, for routing, for traceability, and that's where the services director comes in. So the reason I say that it's a great fit for those who need it is because if you're primarily using services for your ETL, then you're going to want something to help control and manage those, and that's the services director. However, most ETL implementations today aren't service heavy. If you think about what we're traditionally doing, we're operating in most cases behind the firewall. We're moving data from one source to another. We're not looking to open that up to the outside world. We have other ways of doing that through intermediaries, through middleware, through applications designed for that purpose. So it's tricky because we all know that things are moving much more towards the SOA cloud-based world these days. Could I see services director becoming far more prevalent in the future? Absolutely. Could I also see that we just use more middleware to manage the SOA and we still keep our ETL separate? I could see that too. So I don't think services director is going away anytime soon, but I revert back to my original statement. It's one of those very niche tools that if you need it, it's great, but you have to have a specific set of needs for that to really make sense. Okay, let's do this. It's 10:30. That's a perfect point for us to split before we start getting to specifics. Why don't we take our morning break, and then we'll probably run right up to lunch after that.